Good day and welcome to the Strong Ambition podcast in 2023. And this is the 51st episode. We have done over 50 episodes. I'm super pumped. And so I had to do another solo one. And, I hate to be really corny, but I'm going to do a little bit of a flashback episode. But this is also structured in a way to be very intentful and helpful for you as a listener, as a viewer, because there's a lot of really cool episodes I've managed to be able to do over the last 2 years, almost coming up on 2 years now. And there's things that I just wouldn't have learned about had I not have started this podcast. So I think that's what I really wanted to do. I wanted to review some of the past 50 ones, not all of them, because there's some cool stories. We don't need to go over all of them, but it's more about what is most likely going to help you improve in 2023, and especially talk about, not yo-yo dieting, talking about things that are going to help you stay consistent, best episodes and lessons that I've learned over the past 50 episodes. And then right at the end, so stay tuned to the end, I'm legitimately going to give you the exact framework that I give my clients in order to be successful. So stay tuned for that because it's going to be clear cut, very to the point, exactly how I structure things for them, how they have to set things up, and it's guaranteed to get success if you do it consistently. So let's dive into this. Let's kind of look back at the framework at some of my really favorite episodes. And I'm just going to really tell you the episode if you haven't listened to it. The ones that I'm highlighting are the ones that I'm really hoping, if you haven't heard them, I'm going to recommend them. I'll also kind of dress it up as far as maybe it's not always inherently worth it, because maybe it's not something you're interested in. But the ones that I'm highlighting from the start are very, I think, really cool stories to listen to. So one of the top ones right off the bat was actually Jason Brooks. Jason Brooks is one of my favorite people to talk to. He's a performance psychologist. And, we talked about a high performance mindset, and it was so helpful to hear him really describe what it is that makes people perform at a higher level, what makes them able to engage in life at just higher caliber. And I have another interview I did with him, which will eventually be a podcast that I did for my clients. But every time you hear him talk about, really structuring your mind to just go after what you need rather than deliberating things in your own mind. And he has a really great way of describing this neutral thinking. He didn't create it, but he was the one who really amplified it for me. And it's basically prevent negotiations in your mind. The good thing or the bad thing, it's just the thing. And especially when you have negative thoughts that make something seem like it's worse than it is, he had pointed out that negative thoughts are almost 10 times more potent than positive thoughts. So you're laying in bed doubting your own thought pattern, and this is a story he describes. He's in bed, it's cold in the morning, it's dark out, he has to get up at 4 or 5 a.m. There's a lot of reasons not to get up, but instead of listening to all the negative ideas, he just says the action, swing the leg. So as soon as he swings the leg out of bed and he touches the ground, he's moving. And that's what really, really helpful and really powerful and potent. And I highly recommend that episode. And from there, we actually have episode 8 with me and AJ. Me and AJ have had many episodes. That was the last episode, but this one was really cool because it was the fundamentals of, overcoming some misconceptions and strength. But what was really cool was to listen to the description bodybuilding prep versus real life. And we do kind of describe how you need to approach those with two different lenses because, one person with real life, we're going to be at higher calorie content and still be in a calorie deficit. So you can work towards all these other goals that you have in mind. And I think it clears up some of the misconceptions because bodybuilding is its own sport, right? Like powerlifting is its own sport. And, high level, it's like driving a car is not NASCAR, but we tend to confuse bodybuilding principles, which are important principles, when it's far end extreme versus how can we do this more real life? And that was a really good discussion for that. Episode 18, Laura Cicerelli came on, and that is my sister-in-law, and she's actually currently in her PhD doctoral for clinical psychology. And so she really understands behaviors of tools for behavior change, and that's what we discussed. And it was really helpful because she had some really important principles that you have to understand. You got to understand your why. Why are you changing your behavior? And so many people do not value that why enough. And then we talk about, the main things are going to be overcoming challenges. What could we start with? What are the baby steps to start with? And then we really describe some really practical ideas in order to implement them. Highly recommend that one, to really think about the mindset that you're going to need to require for behavior change. Now, the next one, episode 21, was probably one of my favorite people that I connected with. And it was Alicia Castaneda. And she talked about coming out of her own eating disorder. And she came out of depression. And she figured out a lot of this herself just by doing her own research. And it's really fascinating to hear her break down what, emotional eating can actually be from. She had some really powerful things about, what is mental satiety versus physical satiety. She talked about sitting with emotion, understanding your emotions. And it didn't really resonate with me until later. And I'll discuss the other episode that kind of brought that to light later. But it was a very helpful one because she really talks about just how emotional we are with food and why does emotional eating exist. And she just nails it. She's like, it works. Like, it's super simple. If you have an emotional problem, why not just eat? And so her framework is really helpful, and it really started leading me down the path of understanding it's more about emotions with food than it is even about the nutrition sometimes. Now, you still need inherent nutritional principles to guide you, but why, if we know what we should do, we don't? And it's knowing yourself a little bit better. And when I discussed these with her, I started to question my own behaviors more and more throughout the years, and it slowly but surely actually evolved my binge eating to almost not exist. And it's now making me always question why I'm doing what I'm doing when I find that the emotions in eating really take hold. So I highly recommend that episode, and I highly recommend any of her content. Is She has her own Facebook group, Food Body Self. Really great person to listen to in the space. Then from there, I'm going to recommend, really, the next one that goes into this whole topic was Adele Spragon in episode 28. This one was actually quite life changing for me because initially I found her discussion was pretty good. I wasn't like blown away, but I appreciate what she was saying with patterns. She discusses changing patterns, and really she has this great way in a layman's term, rather than being talking neurobiology and saying, basically, motor neuron patterns, or, just really going to the very high level scientific description of it. She just calls them patterns. And I totally understand what she means. You have, chemistry in your mind that's just structured a certain way to create a pattern in emotion. But what was even more helpful was when I actually did get her book. Her book, which was called The Shift, was free, by the way. So there's information on our website to find her. And basically, you just go to her website, you order it, you just have to pay shipping, and it was like $15. And it was a pretty short book. It was an easy read. She has a system, a four-step system that's pretty simple. But what was really imperative for me was appreciating her kind of unique approach to understanding what the subconscious mind is. Now, with discussions with Jason Brooks, I started to appreciate that, it is basically your previous history with life is your subconscious mind, how you're going to react to it. She has a great way of describing the subconscious mind as your body awareness. Because right now, for example, you're in a room and there's a temperature regulation going on with your body. Now, right now, because I said temperature of the room, all of a sudden you can actually become aware of how your skin's sensing the room. Now you could also feel the pressure, classic meditation focus, feel the pressure of the weight in your feet or sitting in your chair, whatever you're doing. Now you can pay attention to it. All of those sensory perceptions are there. There's actually other sounds around, whether you got headphones in or not, but there's other sounds you could listen to, but you're not. Meaning that there's always feedback coming into your body. There's always information that's there. But what your mind does is it only focuses on what it needs to. It has a bottleneck on purpose because we can't multitask. We jump from task to task. And so, because that's actually what your mind's doing, your subconscious mind actually probably really does reside with a lot of this information. It's basically below the conscious level because our consciousness can only handle so many things. Now, what she kind of describes in her book, which I think is really interesting, and I know she's not the only one to say this, but it was very well put, is that she described these ideas of, well, what about when you're a kid and you had a very impactful situation? She describes a unique scenario where she basically said, what about if you were a kid and you were in a guitar store, a music store, but for some reason you lost your mom? And all of a sudden you're panicked and you're very, very terrified and you're very scared. Now, that moment, even though it's just being lost in a guitar store, sits with you. And then you find yourself 20, 30 years later seeing a tattoo of a guitar and all of a sudden becoming a little bit more irritable because something about the setting and the environment reminded you of that moment. Now, that's maybe it's an anecdotal story, but I actually do think there's some potency there to that possibly being true for us, that if we're in a similar environment that once caused us to feel a certain way, a certain reaction, then you're going to be forced to want to do that again. And so, and like at a very physical level. And I think what was really interesting to team up Alicia Castaneda's stuff to Adele's stuff, because Alicia says sit with emotion. I didn't know what that meant. And then when you look at Adele's 4-step system, one of the main things she says is to identify the feeling in your body. And that's what I didn't pay attention to, that emotions are physical. Emotions are very physical. So she has a bit of a really cool thing in her book. I can't recommend it enough. Is that it is more about how you actually feel, act, and then think. But we want to believe we feel, think, and act. So in a situation where you make an incorrect action, you said, I'm sorry, I felt like it was a good idea at the time. And sometimes you even know it's a bad idea, but the feeling is so potent, you feel like you can't control it. And I know just from eating, I can remember many times, one in particular where I was doing the calorie counting, I was trying to cut weight for boxing, and I was like, oh, I got 200 calories here, I can have a bowl of cereal. And then after the one bowl, certainly not satisfied. I didn't appreciate the low satiety levels that actually come from cereal back in the day. And so after the one bowl of cereal, I poured another. And I ate that bowl of cereal very quickly. And I poured another. And at that point, I was watching myself act. I was just watching it. It did not feel like I had much control. And I felt like this subconscious level of action was just being was overthrowing my conscious level of thought. I just felt so, not to mention, and the calories weren't super aggressive, but they probably could have been with how much boxing I was doing, all that stuff at the time. My body was just starved. But that's important to pay attention to, right? Because if you are going into calorie deficit, you're trying to lose weight, trying to look good in the new year, well, there's going to be a point where it's just going to be, if you go too hard too fast, like it's going to be really challenging. And so the really cool experience I had with Adele's story was actually, I remember one day I had a bad night of sleep, was very stressed about work, very stressed. And because I had that bad night of sleep, I was already in a bad mood all day. And so bad sleep, bad mood. And at this point, because I knew I needed sleep and I just felt down, it was just things weren't going well with the business. And I was just like, the one simple solution for me was to smoke weed because it would make me forget about my world's problems. And and then I would be like, well, it was justification. I'm for sure gonna fall asleep. But a part of me also knew this from the last year that I had done that, I smoked weed significantly less. I don't even think I smoked weed 9 times maybe this year. And this past year, I was actually allowed 12. And I just started to realize, wow, I binge every time. So it wasn't necessary. And that was the problem. It's like, if I'm going to smoke weed, I just know myself, I'm going to binge on food. So then that's actually going to make worse sleep. So I knew that this was like a very poor structured, kind of instinct. So, End of the day, I finished my work and I closed my computer, and I just remember literally sitting there for the first time with emotion, sitting with emotion. What that actually meant was there's a feeling in my system. My stomach feels bad. My body feels tired, and just sit with it. And that's a really uncomfortable thing, because what we want to do is want to do something to get rid of it. Let's eat some food. Let's watch TV. Let's be distracted from that problem. But to sit with the physical discomfort and emotion, actually, from Adele's description, gives you an opportunity to challenge the instincts around it. And that's exactly what happened. So I sat there and I literally just sat with it, sat with that emotion. And I looked at two different paths that I could choose in that moment. I could go with my old instinct of smoking weed, or what if I went for a walk? If I just walked to the store, I could buy myself some Diet Pop because I like that. And it would just be something better. And it would maybe get my mind off things, or I could work through what I had to do. And it was so interesting because she calls it the shift. And in that moment, when I sat with the discomfort of these signals coming to my body, and I gave myself an alternative emotion, or eternal, not alternative emotion, an alternative option to handle that emotion, my body felt inclined to attempt it. Now I did it. And so I did not smoke weed because I knew that it was going to lead to more discomfort. And then so I went for a walk, came back. I didn't feel dramatically better, but I didn't feel worse. And I felt a little better because I just knew I made, more correct path for myself. Now, the really interesting thought that I kind of, and this is just N of one kind of carryover experiment, was that later on this year, that same year, it was a month or two later, and there was a point where my Instagram account was getting hacked, and the guy almost got in, and I almost completely lost my account. So I was panicked because I knew I messed up. I knew I sent the guy information that I shouldn't have, and I didn't know if I was gonna get back in. Now I knew there was a good chance I could, but there was also a chance I was gonna have to restart my Instagram, and I was super stressed. And again, if you think about where I used to be, and I described before, my old instincts were to smoke weed, forget about the world problems, chill. But that's also not solving any problems. And so what I actually had this urge to do, legitimately had an urge to go for a walk. And I just think that maybe there was something to that. Maybe that now when I feel this urge of, okay, something's wrong, something's stressing me, something feels bad, instead of it being, let's smoke a joint, let's, forget about it, let's go use our energy, let's go for a walk, let's go do something that's going to just expel energy. And I'm not saying that this is 100% for sure, but I felt like there was a shift. I felt like that was pretty good proof to me that I'm on the right track anyways. So I had to tell that story, and I can't recommend those two episodes, episode 21 and 28, enough, because you team those two up, you're going to learn a lot about sitting with emotion, a way to handle yourself around food, a lot more. Now, this is also important to say, these are ideas. The biggest thing that I've been able to do is also put things to practice. And even with Alicia Castaneda, I didn't even know how to sit with emotion until I heard the way Adele described it. And so I really recommend that. I recommend Adele's book, and it was super helpful. Another couple like good stories to listen to is, especially around eating, is actually episode 31. Brent Lomer, he overcame eating disorder himself. He was extremely I believe he was anorexic. I believe he just wasn't eating, and possibly bulimia, but he was super obsessive over it, and hearing how far he came from and how he moved forward, and now he's great shape, and he doesn't have that controlling his life, and hearing how certain really key moments shifted his perspective was really cool. And Mitch Calvert, coming from the other end of the extreme, where he was obese and he did not want to be episode 42, he did not want to be a statistic, which I think is really cool. How he just like, man, I just don't want to be a stat. I just don't want to be another person falling to this. And so two different extreme examples, but how they both end up with a very simple approach of strength training, protein, and count the appropriate type of calories. There are some of those really inspiring episodes because those are the ones that are more tangible to food, mindset around food. But some really good inspiring ones are any of the boxing ones I've had with Brent Butt. Episode 2, you hear how he talks about when you're backed into a corner, what are you going to do? And that's what boxing challenges you on. Ryan Savage, hearing Ryan Savage, who is a 7-time national team member, 4-time champ, like hearing those people talk with their framework around how they attack life is super inspiring and helpful. And John Quinnett, episode 32, it was my most listened to podcast. And it's super interesting. Now we talk more about boxing technique and stuff like that there, but hearing him talk about the framework and then how he applies that to his life is super, super inspiring. Matt Bailey, super inspiring. How they were not going to deny him from being a professional hockey player, and he just put every effort that he had into it. Keith Billows, mindset of becoming an entrepreneur. He's a millionaire now, and he really just always pushed forward. And he actually talks about his climbing Mount Kilimanjaro and his mindset that he actually used to overcome that. And Robert Broughton, episode 15, he's also a performance psychoanalyst, so he helps people with their performance in sports. And hearing him really talk about the subconscious and conscious level of mind, he actually has this really, really cool mindset around appreciating that you're talking to your inner child. Your inner subconscious takes things very literal. So if you insult yourself as a joke, it's pretty literal to yourself, and you're going to feel like that's the identity that you're actually going to incorporate, and it's going to feel who you are. Oh, I'm just joking, but you can't really joke with your subconscious mind that well. And I really value that piece. Some really inspiring ones. Lindsay Shooter, episode 16, she changed her whole career. Gavin, mindset of an entrepreneur. He was my very first business coach. Super cool listening to Mel Skabinski. Episode 12, you're going to hear about both strength and conditioning and injury prevention, plus how she actually you can hear how she always applies a really high level of execution and going above and beyond with everything she does. There's a roundtable on episode 14. We actually get to hear from 4 different entrepreneur females and hearing how they were just challenged over the years to become their own bosses, and really cool discussion there. There's a lot of episodes on training knowledge that I highly recommend that you review if you're really just curious about training. If you haven't heard these episodes, AJ and I, as I had mentioned, episode 8, we talk a lot about it. Mel Skabinski, as I mentioned, Nate Rubin will actually help you understand more about ergonomics, which is just day-to-day work-life injuries. So is sitting or standing at a desk better? And we go over that and go over the studies for that. And then from there, we have one of my favorite actually deep dives on training knowledge was actually George Riles. Really, he's like a hyper analytic person. He's made peace that he has ADHD, and with that ADHD mind, he really analyzes that stuff. John Jordanson, he was also a strength coach with me. He was actually someone who was in a mini pod with me. We used to talk weekly, and it was really great discussion. We talked about injury prevention. He does a great job on there talking about how you don't have to be defined by all these ideas that you have to grow old with training. And me, John, and Brent actually have a great discussion in episode 34. It's a really cool one for strength training and the things that really bother us about the fitness industry and strength industry, where we can actually simplify it a lot for you in there. And Megan Pomerinsky, episode 43, really good one as far as injury prevention. Episode 46, Nada Hassan, she helped me so much with my powerlifting, and the first therapist that I got to see that actually made a huge impact on my knee. My knee is finally getting better, which is super cool. And Dean Cordingley, episode 48, we have a really good discussion on actually kind of like trying to bridging the gap between research, and this was a recent one not too long ago, bridging the gap between research and in the actual practice, but like he's seen so much good research. And we talk about hypertrophy training, we talk about recomposition, which is gaining muscle and losing body fat at the same time. And it's really cool because he really humbles me so much. My question saying it depends. And it's super important that someone answers a question like that. Now, there's some more in there, like even like another great mindset one that I had recently with Joe Marcoux, which if you didn't listen to, I highly recommend. Is he even had a betrayal where his wife, cheated on him with one of his best friends, and like those are really cool stories that I always try to shed light on. I remember Matt Fritz came on and he talked about psychology, and really like I asked him what the best thing that he had learned in psychology was, and he had said it's about the stories we tell ourselves. You have two brothers, they both have the same father who's an alcoholic. One of them turns into an alcoholic, one of them turns out to be very successful. And you ask them both, why did you turn out the way you did? And they both have the same answer. I had no other choice. My father was an alcoholic. And so, it's the stories we tell ourselves that really define how we're gonna evolve. And I thought that was such a really oriented story to really ask, like, are you a victim of your circumstances, or are you going to use your circumstances in order to become better? And I thought that was really cool. And there's a few other ones there that I could really recommend, but I want to keep it more to the point of helping you in 2023. Okay. So those are some that I really recommend. As you can see, some of the ones I was really passionate about that have been very helpful for me. And the big thing with starting the new year is we want to make sure you're starting off right. We want to make sure that you have a plan, and we don't want to fall off the plan. That's the whole thing, right? So when I really talk more about the yo-yo because that is what I know. That is what a lot of people actually deal with is inconsistencies. And I rather describe it as a pendulum because I find that the pendulum kind of really sheds light on the momentum that we tend to have for discipline, which is that we can withhold and we can pull back and we can just imagine this big heavy mace that's in front of you. It swings like a pendulum and you can pull it back, but it's heavy. And then the harder you pull back, the more you actually see for results, but it's heavy, right? So you're holding back on your nutrition, holding back from like treats, you're working hard in the gym, all these things. Then you get to a point that either you fatigue too early because it's just too hard, or maybe you even get to where you want to be and you're happy with your physique. Oh, well, then I'll definitely let go. Right. So either you're just too tired too soon, or you get to where you want to be and you just want to let go. Either way, we don't want to sustain this. But that's, the unfortunate thing is that we always, sustainability is really the key. The consistency is the key. But it's such a boring answer, right? It doesn't really solve your problem. But you're trying to control from not being extreme. The thing that you really want is just slight discomfort, slight shifts. Because I've used this analogy as well. Instead of trying to drive a car in a completely different direction, doing a 180 on the road because you roll your car, if you steer a car just like 5 degrees, 15 degrees even to the left, you'll make a big U-turn. Like you can. It's just you have to do it steadily and your body won't shift too hard. Now, going back to the pendulum, the thing is with calories and energy and life, there's still ebbs and flows. So I say it's not the yo-yo, it's the ebbs and flows. It's understanding how you can have higher calorie days and lower calorie days. It's understanding how you can have higher frequency in training and lower frequency in training. But we want to have it as consistent as possible. And you want to set you on that trajectory. So I'm going to go over some exercise and activity things, and I'll dive into the nutrition principles, and I'll explain to you how that really covers your metabolism. And if you stick to this plan, I'm telling you, it's not even a question if you get results. From there, it's accountability. Now, let's talk about exercise activity first, because exercise and activity are far less emotional, and they can actually just be controlled more routinely. Now, strength training is the crux of what is most effective for if you're going to go to the gym, right? I'll explain the benefits of cardio after, but strength training is going to build your muscle tissue. If you don't have any, and if you already have it and you want to maintain it as you lose weight, right? We don't want to just lose body fat and muscle mass. If you want to maintain it, you need that strength stimulus. Plus, you move better, right? You go to pick something up, you're stronger. You go to move around, everything's more efficient. And I think it's super impactful to know. Let's say you do one hard, heavy set. It could be goblet squat, it could be leg press, it could be back squat, it could be deadlift. You do one hard, heavy set. Okay, you got to ramp up. It's not safe to go in there cold. But let's say you get that one heavy set and it takes you 20 to 30 seconds. And you push yourself to like a 9 out of 10, right? Maybe even a 10 out of 10, as long as you didn't hurt yourself. Not hurting yourself, but you hit that hard set. Out of breath, everything be like, wow, what a tough thing. Your physiology is now different from that 30 seconds. Even 30 minutes on a treadmill, even an hour on the treadmill doesn't do the same thing for your physiology. It does not do the same thing to the muscles. Now, hey, you'll burn calories. I'm not going to argue going for 30 minutes to an hour if you're jogging or something like that. It still does burn calories very efficiently, but it doesn't change your physiology. It doesn't improve your physiology the same way. And it's just something you also don't need unless you're going after a sport that requires you to have significantly better cardiovascular. So strength training should be a minimum of twice a week, upwards to 5 times a week. And so I kind of came up with a simple formula for people to figure out how that's a bit of a spectrum, right? What is the most you can do in a week? Okay. Good week. You don't got too much on, but it's the most you could do. Okay. Like some people might say, oh, well, 5. Some people might only say 3, and that's okay. Right. People might say 2. Well, let's hopefully keep it at 2 then. What's the minimum you can do? Busy week. Just imagine throughout the year, oh, well, sometimes I have this and this, and it can all land in 1 week. So maybe I only get 2 in. Okay. So let's say on a good week, you have 4, and on a bad week, you have 2, then do 3. Like just take the average of the 2 and do that very consistently. And then you can always have like your main core exercises, the main ones that you're always going to stick to, is like 3 days a week. But then you have a 4th bonus day. Hey, I'm going to do whatever I haven't done, do some arms and calves, right? I can go and do a high intensity interval cardio. I'll explain the benefit to that after. But make it where you can see yourself. And I'm not kidding when I say this, the entire year, not this first month, not the second month, the whole year, even on your busiest week. That's your goal. Now, how you set that up? We want to squat, hinge, push, pull. Now let's go into more layman's terms so you understand that. Squat pattern or anything quad dominant. So that could be a leg press where you feel more in your quads. That could be a leg extension. And when you're new to exercise, literally just go do leg extensions. I would rather it be so simple that your quads were done rather than, is this a squat pattern? I don't know. Hit your quads. And then for hinge pattern, it should be more glutes or hamstrings. But again, if you're not familiar with like deadlifts and those kind of patterns, just hit glutes or hamstrings. Okay. Choose a machine that has glutes or hamstrings. Machines are fine for the starting point. And then from there, and honestly, if you're doing a 3-day a week program, it should probably be somewhere just total body is probably the best way to start. Later on, you can go lower, upper, and then total. But I'm not really big on people doing push pull legs. I think more balance and simplicity is a little bit more helpful. So push pattern would be either horizontal push or vertical push. I think more horizontal push is important for most people. Vertical push, meaning pushing over your head, would be more shoulders and traps, and it's still helpful. But I think we just definitely need more chest and triceps and more pushing objects away from you. But we definitely need horizontal pull and overhead pull, which would be as described. It's more your lats and your traps, and it's literally pulling over your head or pulling at you. And you should try to find in basically what I usually try to say is do somewhere near I want to say it's not quite 2-to-1. It's kind of like 3-to-2 pulls to pushes. So just occasionally I'll make sure that I have like an extra fly in there for like my post delt or rhomboids, because then I'm getting better posture out of it. And then for your core movement, I believe in unstable planks or weighted planks or carries. Now, I just really kind of describe that unstable planks are a bit more important, or waiting a plank. Now, if you, again, beginners are a bit different. If you just got a plank to plank because it's hard for you to do a good solid plank, by all means. There's also active planks, RKC plank, where you're actually pulling your elbows to your toes and toes to your elbow. An active plank is a bit different, but that's why unstable are naturally going to be like plank pointers. You're in a plank, point out, and try to keep those hips stable. Way more activity in there, way more helpful, because that's the core is supposed to do. Core is supposed to stabilize your body. And then carries. That's a moving plank. That's when you're using your core the most. That's when it's going to help you in life. Or I went to pick up this object and I hurt my back. Well, your core was not activated enough when you go to lift that object. That's the problem. So when you actually want to have that core stability, you got to practice stabilizing your core, walking with it. So there's farmer carries, there's overhead carries. I actually really encourage a single arm farmer carry, probably my favorite. Um, or you could even do a cross carry, where it's one low heavy and one high light, because then you kind of get upper back posture out of that one when it's overhead, and it's going to help you with shoulder stability. And that low heavy one's going to help the hip, going to help your grip. So highly recommend carries around, you can usually just choose a length, two lengths, or around that 30 to 45-second mark. Or you can even march. It's actually something I've learned recently, is like just marching in the spot. It's fundamentally the same thing. And so again, just talking about the splits, I would do 3 total bodies to start. If you're familiar, if you kind of like the lower push pull, and then, or sorry, lower upper, which would be a push pull, and then a total body, that one also works really well for people. The only thing is if you're new, total body in case you miss one. If you're consistent, then I would go more into the lower upper total, and you also have an option doing another total, right? And then, so I was talking about cardio conditioning, like high intensity interval, super helpful. I'm going to say helpful, not necessary. The reason why I don't think it's necessary is because good strength training does what a lot of HIIT does. High intensity interval cardio does do similar stuff, especially when we're already just trying to get going, trying to get consistency down. Now, let's say you're a very consistent training already. You're training 5 days a week, and so I'm kind of pulling you back from things. I actually do encourage you to go 5 days a week if you can go 5 days a week. I actually wouldn't encourage more than it unless you're doing like a bodybuilding show, as I am. I am doing 6 days a week, but I'm doing it because I have a very specific goal in mind, and it is more than I actually even want to do, which tells me I'm on the right path. But more to the point, point for you is high intensity interval cardio is actually going to it will help stimulate muscle growth if you do appropriately. Not 30 on 30 off like the classic. It can, but not as well unless you're doing kind of a handful of sets. It can, but make sure you give yourself good breaks at some point. You need 2 to 3 minute rest at some point. It needs to feel as intense as a squat does to get the anabolic stimulus. It shouldn't just be like feel kind of hard. It should feel like a 9 or a 10 out of 10 effort. Now that is going to actually just require so much more intensity from your muscles. And I call it strength like intensity with an aerobic like action. Sprinting on the treadmill. It could be battle ropes. It could be med ball slams. It could be just sprints outside. It could be sprinting on the bike, assault bike, boxing. But if you actually already have a sport, here's a really good mindset. That's your HIIT, right? Like if you play hockey, start sprinting, like stop coasting. It's taken care of. Like you're literally taking care of that aerobic system. And the thing that you're getting the benefit, not just from there's an anabolic stimulus of actually some muscle building, but and it's not really, you don't want to focus on something that hard for the calorie burn. There is a partial benefit, but it's not so impactful. You're not burning 1,000 calories more that day. You're burning like comparably maybe 20% more if it's a whole HIIT workout. But you are going to improve your aerobic system. Now, the aerobic system being improved makes this heart health, better longevity, most likely, if it's the right amount, because too much cardio can actually result in more issues with heart health. So there's always an in between, but it can actually help you recover between your sets. So you actually could have better strength from having an additional HIIT day or some high intensity interval cardio in your routine. So let's say I'm going to come from like more of the beginner, and I'll talk about the other extreme. Let's say the beginner who's doing 3 days a week. I recommend that you actually just do one high intensity interval cardio exercise in one of those 3 days. So you fit it in maybe once or twice a week. At the end of the day, and you just do somewhere around 20 to 40 seconds per, and you do somewhere around like 4 sets, 3 or 4 sets. You treat it like sets of squats, and you do some sort of sprint that you would enjoy, right? You say, well, I hate running, but I like the bike, or I hate the bike, but I like the rower. Choose the thing that's going to be hard, really hard for you to maintain good power and speed for 20 to 40 seconds, and take double to quadruple the rest. Like, it's actually on purpose that you do that, so you do that much better. This will help your overall aerobic. You're just going to be super efficient and way more efficient. Now, let's say you really enjoy HIIT a little bit and you're like, I really like that cardio, as some people do. It feels like you're burning more calories, which inherently you slightly are, but not as dramatic as you think. And you just like those because you get an adrenaline rush from it. You absolutely do. I miss having it in my routine. My knee just can't handle it. Plus, I'm doing bodybuilding, so I just don't do it. But I definitely understand the pull to it. So you're like, I want to do a HIIT day. I would do it once a week. I would not do it at night. Don't do it after 7 p.m. But I recommend people, and I have clients that put it in on the weekend, on the Saturday or Sunday, and they do one high intensity interval cardio where you're doing similar idea where you choose, basically maybe 4 different exercises or 4 different interval groupings. So maybe it's all treadmill, but you choose different interval work and rest ratios with 2 to 3 minutes between, or you choose the treadmill, you choose the bike, you choose the battle ropes, and you choose boxing, and you got 4 between. You take 2 to 4 minute rests, and you do about 4 to 5 sets with each of those. So hopefully that kind of describes it well. And that's kind of your optional HIIT conditioning. It will make you more efficient at strength training as well. It will lower your resting heart rate. Like, there's definitely health benefits. Strength is more important, but this is a wonderful cherry on top. Movement is actually more important. So that's my next part for as far as looking at your overall controlling your metabolism. So we do the strength training so that your BMR, which is your basal metabolic rate, maintains or improves. And that is 50 to 70% of your calories that you burn just at rest. So if you have more muscle tissue, your body will just burn more calories at rest. That's why we do strength training. That's why even HIIT is better than steady state cardio. Now, movement itself is super helpful or super necessary to be consistent, to maintain a consistent metabolism. So basically, if you think about it, because you have just your calories that you burn from just your BMR, thermal effective food, and which is just when you digest food. That's why we eat more protein. And then you have exercise and non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Now, I used to dress it up as walking is neat, non-exercise activity, but I've been kind of humbled to appreciate that, like, because there's a level of non-exercise activity that is just, it's mostly unconscious. So basically, you can think about it as being your work or just what you do without thinking. And this is actually important to realize that it's a bit different than exercise activity thermogenesis, because exercise is intentional. And non-exercise is basically, if you were to just leave a person in the room, they would just spontaneously create energy or not. And this is how me and my brother are inherently different. My brother is more of the ectomorph, naturally leaner, and it's not hard for him to lose weight or keep weight off with minimal exercise, not tracking calories. I'm not sure if he's ever tracked calories, but I actually noticed, like, even just talking to him the other day, he's just kind of rocking back and forth. He just felt the need to move. And I've just always been more of a sedentary chill, and I'm more of a spurter, but I do not have that kind of naturally moving. And people who are more ectomorph tend to be, this is a spectrum. Everywhere's from ectomorph, mesomorph, which is in between muscle mass and leanness, to endomorph, which is muscle mass, but tend to be more fat. And so in the spectrum of that, we're kind of near the opposite ends. And so with that, what I found was really interesting here in the research on this, when you actually put people in a room, and this is how you figure out calories, is how much they expel CO2. And so they gave them, I'm pretty sure they overfed them. It was an overfeeding study. And they just watched to see what would happen. People are different. And it would go from people would gain so much weight to one guy barely put on any weight. He actually just increased his non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is actually where people say they have a fast metabolism. I get that argument, because it's like people will naturally just start to move more. And the reason why I want to dress that up is because if you're not that person, maybe you do need to take responsibility for your activity. Now, the reason why I like calling walking non-exercise activity thermogenesis is because we don't have to make it feel like cardio. And but let's go back to just my word movement, because I want you to just look at it as movement. If your job is already active, let's say you're, a nurse, you're always on your feet. Let's say you're a waitress or a waiter, you're always on your feet. Let's say that you're a construction worker. I have a client construction worker. I'm not worried about his output. He easily crushes 15K, almost 20K thousand step days. And then he was even describing, oh yeah, I was just taping the other day and I was just kind of doing this. I'm like, dude, that's movement. You're moving your arms. I know it's not as much as normal, but it is still more than a sedentary worker. Now, if you're a sedentary worker, this is why I need you to see it as just movement. So are you getting 8 to 10K steps a day? And this is actually really important because, like, I mean, I work from home. And if I'm working from home, I'm excited when I get to go see clients in the gym because I know I'll at least walk around more and I'll increase my steps. Now, I really recommend, if you have not tracked your steps, track them. Right now, you can estimate it. Estimate it by simply thinking, have I had a reason to walk around for 90 minutes? 90 minutes spread out throughout the day. It could be 5 minutes to your car, 5 minutes in from the parking lot, 5 minutes around the office. Oh man, that was only a half hour. You're probably not getting that many steps. Like, it's actually quite likely you're not physically needed to move enough. And that's actually going to be a problem for your metabolism, because even if you do exercise that day, exercise does not burn that many calories. And so let's say you're working out, even strength training, and yes, it does build your BMR very slowly, but you might only burn 400 calories. And we don't want to get caught up in the specific number of how many you're burning every day. We just want the number as consistent and high enough that it's healthy. And basically, like, if let's say you're doing strength training 3 to 4 days a week, and you're other than that, you're at a desk, there's other reasons why you don't want to be at a desk all day. Like, you're always hunched in. You might get shoulder problems, back problems, right? You're also really in a stressful state. You're at work, you're hunched in, and you're in this high cortisol state. You're always white knuckling it all day. If you never get a break from that, I don't believe that it's inherently healthy. And then you look at the research correlatively over years. The reason why they say 10K steps is very specific to, that's when people live longer. It's actually just that simple. It's one of the heaviest correlators to living longer is getting 10K steps a day. And it's 8 to 10. 8 is still pretty good. And then 10 is where it kind of plateaus, where most of the other numbers it doesn't impact it as much for longevity. So are you getting 8 to 10K steps? And if you don't know, I highly recommend a step counter. On Amazon, they literally cost 20 to 40 or $50. You get one for your, like, that really replicates Fitbit, and it's not the calorie tracker that matters. It is the step counter. I recommend step counters to my clients because it will give you that biofeedback to say, oh, hey, I haven't moved enough, especially even on an off day. It's Sunday, you're not at work. Okay. Oh man, I only have 3,000 steps. Go for a walk with a loved one. And that's why it's saying movement. Just move. Give yourself a reason to move and try to create some sort of structure around it. I encourage morning, noon, and night. Go for a walk in the morning. And I'm in Winnipeg. I know it's cold. I have a treadmill, luckily, so I do use my treadmill, but sometimes I go for walks. And I mean, I'm going to be doing dog sitting here in a month. I'm going to be walking dogs morning, noon, and night. And that's actually easily going to get me 15K steps. And so have a reason to move if you're not getting enough movement in your day, and it's imperative for your overall metabolism. Now that's basically it for training. Make sure you move enough, 10K steps a day. Make sure you're doing your strength. There's also progressive overload. Make sure you're trying to get better at things. I just want to nail down consistency first, and then from there, write down your numbers. 2 to 4 sets, one set hard as you can, and always track that last set. And that kind of sums that up pretty well, and make sure you're getting 10K steps. From there, basic principles for nutrition. Some things you probably heard me talk about before, but I got to go over again. And I'm going to give you a little bit more details here that might help you. So basic principles is to make sure you have 0.7 to 1.5 your body weight in grams of protein. And I actually have 1.5. So, I'm 200 pounds, 210 pounds. I have upwards 250 a day. That is because I get more satiety I feel like I'd rather have more than enough. I'm kind of doing a bit of a recomp during some weeks, meaning trying to put on muscle mass while I lose body fat, and that just hedges the bet that I can actually do that. Now, if let's say you're like, oh man, I'm not quite at my body weight, and you're 150 pounds, you're at 125, you're actually doing quite well. So don't worry too much about that. It's just see the benefit in that you're going to be more satisfied with more protein and making it so it's like 40% of your total calorie intake. But let's just start with get consistent protein. You spread that through 3 to 4 meals throughout the day, however many meals you have. Don't have it all at one night. Have it morning, noon, and night, or throughout each individual meal. Have the even amount spread throughout the day. And it's going to work better for muscle recovery, and it's going to work better for appetite. It works super impactful. The major time is the first 2 meals. The first meal, people tend to underdo their protein, and the second meal, people tend to underdo the protein. So basically double it. And I do recommend you track. Like, I mean, you can start off with the old palm method, which is, take your hand, that size is about 20 to 30 grams. And so basically have 2 of those in each meal, maybe 3, depending on how many meals you have. And that's a good starting point for protein. Okay. I do encourage animal based as it's going to have better amino acids. It's just easier for you to do. It gets really complicated to try to get plant-based protein, especially because 50% of it will not be absorbed in your body. Now, calories are where it actually gets really challenging. So I look at quality and quantity. Let's talk quality first. Quality food, whole food is just like it's meat, fruit, and vegetables. The main grains I recommend are rice, quinoa, couscous, potatoes, things that you just have to boil or cook. I'm not saying that wheat or grains like that are really the devil. I just think that we don't know enough about whether or not some people could actually land on the spectrum for food sensitivity to those things. And when you take those out, people tend to feel better. If you can have the right amount and you don't feel bad on them, then I'm not against whole grains. I just think you can do a little bit of an elimination diet at the starting point of a diet, and starting with rice, brown rice, white rice, quinoa, couscous, potatoes, like those things are extremely unlikely to give you any sort of reaction. And then from there, later on, okay, let's see if I actually do tolerate bread like I used to. I consider those foods that I just described, those carbs and fruit, by the way, fruit is the best carbohydrate to me because it comes with micronutrients and we don't have to do anything to prepare it. And that's my main point. Whole foods require minimal things done to it in order for us to ingest it. And because minimal things have been done to it, our body can recognize the satiety that comes along with it better, right? So that's my main principle for that is just make sure that your A's, I call them A's and B's, because the A's, you eat these foods, it's extremely likely that you're going to be on point with your diet. B's is slightly less of a chance, but you're still in the 80s. And then once you get the C's and the D's, you're lowering your GPA. And less of a probability you're going to get success. So we want 90% of our diet to be A's and B's, and then the rest, having some fun food here and there, and I'll explain the treat strategy later. So make sure that you're choosing those kind of foods, and basically you want to figure out your quantity, figure out your calorie requirement. Now I have a blog on my website that I highly recommend, but there's almost all calorie trackers have it. I recommend Minded Diary. You set your goal, it goes your body weight, you set your always set, in my opinion, always set your activity level to sedentary or lightly active. If let's make it based on your job, not your exercise activity. Completely make that relative to your job, not whether or not you go to the gym, because it's going to overestimate how many calories you burn. And that'll actually help you figure out your calorie requirement immediately. But you're still going to need to test it, but it'll actually help you. So you start with that. And then the other major thing there is make sure that you drink water. If you haven't, it took me a long time to appreciate that people are still underdoing water. I didn't even think about that until I started having more discussion. I'm like, wow, you actually don't drink water? I thought that was just known, but very simple premise. Bring a water bottle everywhere you go. Okay, that was the first habit that I had in high school that helped me. Water everywhere I go. You're aiming for 4 water bottles a day. Okay, if you really want to hit a goal. Now, first thing in the morning, have a good chug. And then anytime you take a break at work, have a swig. between every coffee, have another swig. Before workout, after workout, have a few good swigs. Make sure you're drinking your water just steadily, not to discomfort during your workouts. Um, Especially prior to your workout, you want to make sure you're coming in hydrated. So you should be drinking a little bit more prior to the workout. And then before and after meals, having a sip or a little bit during. Don't You're not trying to use it was this old water trick to try to drink a ton of water so you feel full, because I do think that could be detrimental to dilute too much of your stomach acids. But you just to have like as your preferential fluid source. And then careful in the evening unless you're feeling dehydrated, because if you have an excessive amount of water, that might actually make you want to go to the bathroom at night, and it might disrupt your sleep. So you're going to want to get your sleep, which, by the way, 7 to 8 hours of sleep. I probably should have put that as number one in your habits, but I wanted to make it more exercise and nutrition specific. Now, this is how I recommend you set up your plan: is choose 6 meal types. Okay, there's meal types where you can reference your protein. So there's proteins that are fat-based proteins, fat balanced proteins. So that's like an egg or lean ground beef, sirloin with a little bit of fat on it. And basically it's having, or chicken thighs, they can tend to have protein and fat at a good percentage. So if it's around 35 to 45% of the calories coming from protein, the rest coming from fat, you actually have your energy and your protein source there, and they're actually quite satiating. You don't need to add a carb to that other than vegetables, which is like broccoli, cauliflower, that kind of stuff. So you take that two protein and fat ones like that, like lean ground beef and eggs, right? And then you team that up with micronutrients, vegetables of some sort, as I just mentioned. And now you have two protein types, two different like meal choices there. Do another two of lean protein and carbs with some vegetables. So it'd be chicken and say tuna if you like tuna. Like choose two that you like. To be my two has been chicken and pork tenderloin. Pork tenderloin is actually very affordable and it's quite lean. And so then I would choose two different carb sources that I really like white rice and sweet potatoes. I like those two. So I can mix and match those, but now I have 2 to 4 different, mix and match that I can have there. Then two protein, fat, and carb ones, which would be when you actually have just a bit of fat and some carbs. So like salmon actually has a decent amount of fat, but you can still add some carb because it's kind of near a neutral protein, as I call it. Or I have this eggs and oats that I do, which is eggs, egg whites, and oats, and a mix protein, fat, and carbs all together. So you got 6 different meal types, and you got many different ways you can cook it, but stick to those. Don't do anything different. Track it once to make sure you know what the calories are, and then you know what the weights are, and then just weigh them all the time. Have a food scale. Very simple. Eat the same foods 6 out of 7 days a week. Change the foods every week from those 6 that you chose. And now you have your meal plan, right? But eating weighing the food at least 90% of the time, you'll start to get to know the sizes, but weigh, and you don't even have to track. The only thing you might need to track is your treat meal, right? And even then, you're going to want to ballpark it. Now, treats and refeeds is important. So from there, what I would do is once a week, and this is actually what I recommend. You can do it on Saturday, Sunday, or once during the week. But you have one refeed that's whole foods and one refeed that's a treat day, a treat meal. Let's be specific. Let's not do cheat days. Treat meal. So the whole food refeed is actually really, really helpful and very smart. It's just smart to do, to appreciate, man, if I ate the right calories, if I ate my maintenance calories, what does that feel like with whole foods? Because so many people with yo-yo diet actually never get to experience the right amount of calories. That's the problem. You either eat way too much, or you're like, I'm just starving myself. Way too much, or I'm starving myself. So you never feel appetite comfort. Like there's never appetite comfort. There's either over comfort or there's way too under strenuous discomfort. And so to find your appropriate calorie deficit, which would be about 500 calories, 20% calorie deficit in most apps, as long as you're doing it half a pound to a pound per week, should figure that out for you. And then figure out your maintenance so that you bring it up once a week. Now, what helps people who can kind of lose control on the weekends is maybe doing a Wednesday or a Thursday refeed day, because then that way, when they get to Friday, they actually stay more accountable and they actually know, okay, well, I get one more And I actually don't feel too deprived because it wasn't 5 days in a row of deprivation, right? So that's what I would recommend is eat the same foods from your meal plan, but eat more of them, 20% more of them, right? Because you're doing 20% calorie deficit, you do 20% more, and you'd be like, wow, I'm really full. This is really nice. And it's super literally educational for you. That's the right amount of food. Then have a treat day. Now, how I would do a treat day is quite simply follow the calorie plan that you have, but a little bit lighter on maybe the energy source if it's earlier in the day. And then you're basically budgeting to have one bigger meal around 1,000 calories. If you're a smaller person, maybe it's 800. If you're a bigger person, you actually go a little closer to 1,200, but ballpark 1,000. Now, the main strategy I give people is I do recommend a little windowed eating. Maybe skip a little bit of your breakfast or just have a purely protein shake breakfast and then have a high protein lunch. Assuming this is a dinner plan, maybe you reverse it if it's a breakfast plan. But assuming you're having dinner, going out for dinner, and then at that dinner, you try to really just you're ballparking, or you can do the calorie check in on the app and see what would be near 1,000 calories. Now, the one thing that's really important to know that this is not a free for all. It's not a cheat day. There's no rules. It's you're treating yourself. Be mindful. It's where that whole discussion with Alicia Castaneda is going to help because she discusses, hey, you got to be mindful with your food choices. You got to really pay attention to what you're eating. Make sure every single bite is like, I really love eating food with my girlfriend because I watch how slow she eats. I'm like, I'm going too fast. I'm not paying attention to every texture and every little bit because you're going to enjoy it more. The whole point of treat food is enjoyment. That's its purpose in your life. We can certainly have it more energy. It's not really serving a purpose better than any other food other than that it tastes good. So you got to give it its due. So you're eating that food very mindfully. And then one of the main strategies I recommend to people is consider in the moment when you know you have to cut it off a little bit and be like, okay, I think I've had enough. You have to know that's going to happen before you even feel full. Right before you start feeling full, you're going to get way more full an hour later. And so, okay, I got to start cutting it off. And then you can tell yourself, hey, I can have a protein shake when I get home. And that little bit there saying, hey, you know what, I get a protein shake when I get home can totally be enough to be like, hey, I think I can pull back because I don't have a scarcity mindset that no food's coming towards me later. And that's super important because when you get into a scarcity mindset, you might want to binge and go down that rabbit hole harder and harder. But as long as you're still enjoying your protein shakes at night, which I highly recommend you have protein shakes that you love, that's going to actually help you pull out of it. And then maybe you are a little bit hungry 3 or 4 hours later. Have a protein shake before you go to bed. You're hitting that protein and your protein anchoring. So that's how I would do the treats. And then go through the different food types. So once a week, you have this food type for your lunch, for your breakfast, and for your dinner. I always recommend a protein shake before bed. And then, the next week, change up a couple of them. The next week, change up. Like the big thing here is you want structure, consistency, but you need variation. And I totally understand that. So you need consistency with structure, right? And then the variation comes within that consistency. It's kind of like strength training, right? Strength training is going to be very consistent for a month. You do the same thing for about a month, and then you change some accessories. You change, okay, after a month, let's do this version of a squat. Let's do this version of a push. Let's do this version of a pull. And you actually will find that's where all your strength gains come. So the same thing's going to happen with nutrition. Now, challenges I'm going to give you a heads up on is going to be consistent movement. So number one that I can see a lot of people coming up with is if you have a sedentary job, consistently trying to get that 10K steps day, even on a day off, is actually quite challenging. So that's why I recommend the trackers. Consistent training after week 3. And I say week 3, even with dieting, everything after week 3 is going to get harder. Right now, a lot of people have like, okay, it's New Year's, new me. And you know what? I support it. Like there's so many people who would say, New Year's is stupid. These resolutions are stupid. I'm just like, if you are willing to create behavior change, hell yeah, good on you. And anyone who says that it's stupid, you know what? Either they're already doing behavior change, which maybe they just don't see the significance of that, or they just don't appreciate how hard it is for you to do it. And if the new year, new me mindset is helping you, fucking right. Let's go. right? I support it, but you're going to want to, you're going to need to predict that this momentum, this motivation is going to disappear. And it's around week 3. So I had a client who talked about the bathtub model. And so at the start, you felt kind of bad after the holidays before, you actually feel worse. You're going to feel worse for at least the next 2 to 3 weeks. And then after week 3, you're going to lose that motivation because you're not going to see significant results. You might see a bit after week 2, maybe your weight goes down a bit, but then you're going to actually get this plateau where you're like, oh man, not much is changing. But what's really cool is once you get over week 4, you start to upswing. You start to get stronger, start to get used to the eating patterns, and you start to actually see some fat loss. And then it's a bathtub model. So it goes down. You feel worse than where you started, plateaus at that worst stage, and then you start to come back up. So consistency is as boring as it sounds. You got to start seeing, like, planning on February. How are you structuring your routine that this stuff that you're doing now is going to be February, March, April, June? Like, you got to see that. And meal prepping is another big thing. So it's training consistently and like all the way into week 4, and meal prepping and planning. I actually recommend you plan 2 meal prep sessions a week. If you plan 2 a week, you plan it on Sunday and on Thursday, it'll get you into that weekend without having to overindulge. Boredom with the food and routine. That is normal. Boredom isn't the end of the world. But if it's, if you're not restructuring things at least once a month, I do recommend you just rethink it a bit, right? Same structure, but different details, right? Squat pattern can be maybe from the hack squat to the leg press with the protein. Maybe instead of chicken breast, you go, into like the fish, try something different. Maybe the same chicken breast, but you try a different recipe. There are dozens, no, thousands of them on the internet, right? You got to put in some legwork, yes, but boredom is inevitable, but there's options to work around it. And then from there, for sure, it's going to be emotional eating. Like, you're going to have days that are tough. Like, I really recommend you start to visualize those days. Visualize what time of the year. If you're single around Valentine's Day, you're going to want to eat chocolate. When you're at this family occasion, you're going to want to do this. When you're at this occasion, you're going to want to drink that. Emotional eating isn't an if, it's a when. Okay. Start to work on mental preparation to overcome that and start to practice it. And then, binge eating is inevitable for a lot of people. Not everyone, but I know myself. So that's why I recommend Elisa and Adele stuff is sit with emotions, listen to your body and listen to what's happening. And when you do binge, when you do fail, it's not even a failure. When you mess up, okay, when you make a mistake, when you miss workouts for a week, when you do this X, Y, Z, whatever it is, failure only exists without further attempts. When you refuse to get back up. And I actually had this quote back in the day. I think I got good at push-ups because of how many times I got back up, because I pushed myself off the ground. And I really want you to imagine this. And this is why I'm so passionate about yo-yo dieters, because they come back to do better. Keep coming back, but reevaluate. So let's say you have a binge, and this is what we're really kind of focusing most of the attention. Okay, you have the feelings of guilt, you have the feelings of remorse. Accept that it was done. It's the acceptance, right, of the mistake first. Then you ask yourself why, what led to it. Okay, let's think about my emotions in the moment. And you can actually look more objectively the next day and say, oh, I was tired, or I was stressed, or I was bored. Okay, that's what you felt in that moment. And that's going to happen again. Can we visualize ourselves doing a different attack? And I try to really compare this to like how athletes reassess their behaviors, right? Okay, you threw an interception. What did you see in the environment? That's why guys look at tape. As a goalie, how did you read that anticipation as a player? And that's how they actually overcome their environment. And you can look at it the same way. Forgiveness is going to be really important because the person that you were in that moment, all they had for tools in that moment made you choose what you did. You could be a different person the day after. I don't believe that things happen for a reason, but I believe you can make a reason that things happen. So whenever mistakes happen, whenever you fall down, whenever things go wrong, that's only up to you to create a reason out of it. Because how many people say, well, this terrible thing happened to me, but XYZ happened after. So I guess things happen for a reason. But no, they made that happen. Go back to the two brothers, one that has, both have an alcoholic father. One remains successful and one ends up an alcoholic. The way that they made that reason affect their life is how their life became better or worse. And so I hope this rant of mine on the past the past episodes were really helpful, because I personally found they've helped me. Like I'm not kidding when I say I really take all these lessons forward, and I hope that my rough uh, game plan for you for 2023 is really going to help. And the last thing that I do recommend is that you appreciate accountability is the last piece. So whether you seek me out for coaching, which I am, again, very passionate about yo-yo dieting, so I definitely understand this more than ever. But even if you just have a friend or someone that you can rely on, that you can talk to, that will hold you accountable weekly, daily, like these things make such a difference, because we lie to ourselves more than any other human in the world. We're the closest proximity. So it's inevitable that you have to lie to yourself more than anyone else. And so it becomes that much harder to do this process if you're not true to the process, because you can easily lie about it. And so if you're with someone supporting you, someone else is doing their own challenge or doing the challenge with you, accountability is what's really going to make the difference for you. So I hope this episode was a helpful one for you for 2023. New year, new me, right? I support it. I support your ventures. And I thank you for supporting this podcast. Over 50 episodes. I hope you've learned a lot, and I hope you learned a lot today, because I'm all about, helping you with your ambition, helping you live a better version of yourself every day that you can. And we know we're not just trying to get to some end goal and then that's happiness, because that's not how it works. That's not how it works here, and that's not how it works in life. Because it's not about the pursuit of happiness. It's about the happiness within the pursuit. And I'll catch you next time.